I started working when there were a lot of Westerns on television and got cast into several of them. And grew up going to Saturday matinees that showed Western movies. I was thrilled. And it was kind of a nice combination and really worked, I think.
I understand that Robert Redford and Paul Newman and George Roy Hill, they kind of worked through about whether or not this movie was intended to be a comedy or a straight drama, a straight dramatic Western. Did you think of it as a comedy or a straight Western?
I don't know, as I thought about it as being either way. You know, I mean, yes, there were the light moments, but then there were some heavy moments too. So, I don't know, I hadn't put it in a category. I do know that in the original script, which I guess for those characters, Butch and Sundance, their gang was called the Wild Bunch, and Sam Peckinpah was making a movie at the same time called the Wild Bunch, and so they changed the name of their gang to the Hole in the Wall Gang.
I take it Redford and Newman were already cast when you came to the picture?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, really. Maybe Paul was. I had made a movie just before that with Redford called Tell Them Lily Boy Is Here. And so we both knew that we were going on to do that movie. And Redford had done a couple of movies before that, but that was his, like, I don't know what they call it, the breakthrough movie.
Sam, you have described yourself in this film as a shadow on the wall.
Card player number 2. Third name from the bottom of the credit list. I did.
How did you come to be a part of this production, even in that small role?
Yeah, I'm gonna bore you with this long tale I told you that I was.
We got all night.
I was a contract player at Fox at the time, and Fox was where they made the film. And I was always eager to be in a Western film as a kid. So here I was as a contract player, and they were getting ready to do this film. And I had a friend who worked in the, this is really an embarrassing tale to tell, but I had a friend that worked in the costume department there at Fox. And I went to him and I told him, I said, hey, I'm gonna go in and meet George Roy Hill on Butch Cassidy, and I'm gonna audition for this part of Macon was the character's name, and he was the guy that ran the bar where the card game took place. I wanna go in costume. And he said, really? Are you sure? I said, yeah, man, I think it'd be a good idea, don't you? And he said, sure. So I got a vest on, and I had a shit. I'm not sure I wore a hat because I figured inside the bar this guy wouldn't be wearing a hat anyway. But I got all duded up at a barkeep, and I went in and read for George, and met with him. Didn't get the part. They used a guy named Donnelly Rhodes, who's now deceased. He was great in it. He was much better. I think I actually probably was too young for the part anyway. But I think that he took pity on me because I got word a couple of days later, hey, oh, you got a part in Butch Cassidy. They want you to play card player number 2. You're going to be in this card game with Redford, you know, so that's how I ended up getting the part.
It's probably the costume.
And how long had you been under contract at Fox at the time?
I think that was my second year that I was there. Not long. You know, the contract program, it was really the end of the contract program. I was there 2 years, and that was just before they dissolved the contract program and before they laid waste to 20th Century Fox, and everybody from Wall Street took over, basically. But it was when Darryl Zanuck was still kind of in the shadows, and
Wow.
Dick was there, saw him every day. You know, they didn't take that program, unlike the program that Katharine was in. They worked those kids a lot. And the one at Fox was really basically on nepotism and girlfriends and boyfriends. Then there was a couple of us that came from nowhere. Tom Selleck was there, he just graduated from USC. And I'd just gotten off a bus from Portland, Oregon, a couple of years before. But I found out early on how to make that program work for me, and you know, I went after it, and I got lucky and got work to the point where I embarrassed myself going in costume to read for something. Never did that again. But, you know, it's funny how it goes.
Katharine, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is, in large part, it's a buddy film. I mean, it's really, in a way, a love story between Butch and Sundance. So, how did you make that part your own, especially when you're sharing the screen with Redford and Newman?
I don't know, I thought that they were both I thought I had both of them, actually. I mean, I'm in bed with Redford in the beginning, and Butch rides by a couple of times by the window on the bicycle, and I get up and go out and go on the bike ride with him.
How long were you in principal photography with Redford and Newman?
I think it was about maybe 3 months altogether.
What did you think of them at that time?
Well, well, I sort of knew Redford because I had just worked with him. And they were both really nice guys. And I think I told you that Redford was getting ready to, I think he produced a movie called Downhill Racer. And he was kind of putting it together while we were shooting Butch Cassidy. So he was on the phone a lot. And Paul Newman knew every joke known to man. And he was always telling a joke. So, okay, we're ready, ready for take one. Well, we wait for Paul to finish his joke and for Redford to get off the phone. I, of course, was perfect and always on time.
You had mentioned the bicycle scene, which is a famous scene with B.J. Thomas's "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head." That's actually one of 3 sequences that are largely musical in the film. And in looking at a documentary on the making of the picture, George Roy Hill mentioned that he was really impressed with how you played these scenes without dialogue, especially the bicycle scene. And I'm just curious as to what kind of direction he gave you in getting to that character at a place, even without William Goldman's dialogue.
Well, they shot it with a very long lens, so there was really nobody around. And we were just sort of given a track to take the bicycle. And it was kind of very improvisational, so there was a lot of freedom. And I mean, there's a part, I haven't seen this, I'm gonna see the film tonight, but I haven't seen it, I don't think, since it came out. I mean, pieces, but not the whole thing. But there's a place where we were shooting, it was sort of this abandoned orchard, and they were running cattle in it, and it was an apple orchard, and we're, kind of throwing apples to these cows, and that just kind of happened. They were there, and the apples were there, and so we just did it.
Well, related to that question about acting without dialogue and creating a moment, creating that character, the two of you made a film together a few years ago called The Hero. And if you've ever seen this film, without any spoilers, there's a moment, you play a divorced couple. And there's a moment where Sam's character is giving some news to Catherine's character, and the director of the film chose to shoot it with a long lens. And you play the scene without dialogue, or at least dialogue that we can hear. And you create that moment just with your physical performance. And I guess related, I want to give the same question to you, Sam. I mean, how do you play these parts? How do you play these scenes with just your body?
I always just think somehow of just being in the moment. It's just, that giving somebody news that you've got cancer, somebody you were married to one time and now divorced to, and so forth, have a child with, is not good news, needless to say, whether you're together or not. It was well known by that time in the film that this character had cancer, so you didn't need to belabor that. You didn't even need to hear him say it. And I think it was really Katharine's move. She kind of slumped against me, as I recall, that made that moment so powerful. And it was just Brett. Brett Haley is a brilliant director, and he knew he didn't need any more than that.
Well, we did. There was a scene that was written. I mean, and there was dialogue, and we shot it in the gallery. And then he decided to move the camera across the street and sort of do the same thing, but not with the dialogue.
Maybe it was just our acting was so terrible. Make it look good. It'll be the first time somebody helped you look good in post-production.
The editors are your friends.
Oh my gosh.
The Hero, by the way, is playing on Hulu. If you've never seen it, you really need to check that out. But one other question I have, directed, I guess, to you, Sam, is, in watching the film The Hero, I was reminded of a film called Akiru, which is a Japanese film by Akira Kurosawa, and it's about an aging bureaucrat who realizes he's dying. And the film covers a lot of the same ground that The Hero does. I'm curious as to if you find these roles even more arresting and more important for you as you're getting older. Do you find them more resonant for you?
Absolutely, no question about it.
God, don't ask me that question.
To have that, Brett wrote that thing for me. He and his writing partner, Mark Bash. I'd worked with both of them on a movie called I'll See You in My Dreams a couple of years before that. It was just such a gift. There were things that were very much right on about me. There were things that had nothing to do with me. I mean, the guy smoked dope constantly. He took pills. I mean, this guy was not, he drank constantly. I mean, and that was a long way from where I am. But there were other things, the relationship with his family, the fact that he'd had this moment in his career and then lost it, the fact that he was selling barbecue sauce with voiceover work. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that was very close to home. And it made it a lot of fun to do. It was just a gift. And to get to work with Nick Offerman again, who's a very close friend, has become a very close friend. Not only Katharine, but, and Laura Prepon playing this kind of girlfriend character that this old guy had. It just was, it was a joy. I actually turned a movie down with Brett that Nick starred in a year after that, but what I was going to say, I'd go such fun to be with, and he's such an accomplished director at this young beginning of his career. It's incredible.
You know, in coming into the theater this evening, I saw a lot of people out there with some cowboy hats on. And, you know,
We're in El Paso, man.
in looking at your filmographies, it's hard to find two performers who are more closely identified with the Western genre than you two. I mean, Katharine, you started off in the 60s and appearing in a lot of television Westerns, The Big Valley, Wagon Train, Gunsmoke, and more. And the two of you have made, you know, countless of TV movie Westerns and features. What is it about the Western that brings you back to it over and over and over again?
It's a pure American form, is the first and it, I don't know, there's right and there's wrong, and there's justice, and there's the wide open spaces. I don't know.
On some level, the same thing Catherine's talking about. It's the simplicity of it. You know, the simplicity of it allows you to tell any number of tales. You know, and I think the classic elements of it are, you know, it's the struggle. It's like man against man, man against nature, man against himself. You know, they're just classic elements, I think, that a lot of people identify with. And I've always also looked at the backdrop, the place. You know, it's what drove your pal John Ford to Monument Valley time after time after time. You know, it's the backdrop. That's as primary of a character in the piece as any of the actors on the screen. You know, and the horses, and just everything about it. Westerns are a lot of fun. They're a lot of work. They're hard work. And unfortunately, I don't think that there's anybody in Hollywood anymore that could mount a Western. They can do it outside of there. Most of the horse work comes out of New Mexico now. The guys that were, you know, there were a lot of big barns when Katharine and I got into the business. And a lot of, you know, the equipment was there, the wagons were there, all that stuff was there. It's gone now from LA. It's not there anymore. It's a different game. You know, but, you know, they still make a good one every once in a while. The Coen brothers made a great one this year. You know, it had some funny stuff in it, but there were some elements of that thing that were as classic as it could have been. You know, there's still hope for Westerns. Katharine and I are going to do another one of these days. Geriatrics on horseback.
Well, it's either that or Fibber, McGee, and Molly.
There was one film, in fact, that the two of you made in '91 called Conager, which is a made-for-TV movie. And if you've not seen it, it's also available online. But it's based on a Louis L'Amour story. How did that film come about for the both of you?
Oh, you have to tell that.
We were doing The Sackets, which was the first time I worked on the Louis L'Amour film. And we were in Arizona shooting. I hadn't begun yet. I'd just gotten into town, and I got the opportunity to go pick up Louis L'Amour at the airport. I'd never met Louis. So I drove down there from this area in Patagonia and picked him up. And on the way back up, he was not in great health. He was beginning to fail at that point. But on the drive up there, he asked me if I'd ever read Conager. And I said, no, sir, I never have. He said, well, you should get a copy of it. You and your wife ought to do it. That you're right for it. It's perfect for you. And, you know, we obviously read the book immediately and thought, yeah, he's right. You know, did not not have the money to option a book at that point or anything else. But I think it was, I don't know what it was, something happened, if it was the Yellow Rose that went for a year, or something changed financially in my game, and I optioned the book. And Katharine and I and Jeff Meyer, a friend of ours that lives up just up the road from here in Marfa, worked on the screenplay, and I produced it. That was one of the great experiences for us. There's a long, tumultuous tale that goes with that in the beginning, where there was a guy named Bob Totten who directed the Sacketts, actually, and Totten had done a lot of really good westerns. He was going to direct the film. He had a real long history with Ron Howard from when Ron Howard was a young kid, and Ronnie really loved Totten. And Totten was he was a tough guy. He was a tough guy. He was a drinker, and he was loudmouth, but he was a brilliant director and a nice man. I'm not, But Totten took the screenplay that Katharine and I worked on for a long, long time, and it was right, because it was Louis' book. We stayed true to the book and write the screenplay. That's why that thing is what it is, because we stayed true to that. I think it was 85 pages long, that book. So we had to embellish it a little bit, but most all that book's in there. But Totten got that screenplay and took it away in 2 weeks and brought it back and delivered a screenplay that was virtually unrecognizable. And Ron Howard was prepared to go ahead and do with it. It was Magic Films, and I just said, nah, I'm not doing this, pal. We'll take this thing to HBO, do it over there. So it was one of those impasses that, every once in a while in life comes up, but we so believed in it. And I wasn't gonna weaken on it, because it was Louis L'Amour.
Well, you can tell there's
Totten's line was, Louis L'Amour is a good storyteller, but he's a terrible writer. and that kind of was, anyway, I don't know what got me into that, but there you go.
In watching the film Conager, there's a lot of old Hollywood character actors in it, including Ken Curtis, James Gammon, and Barry Corbin. But Ken Curtis, in particular, for those of you who don't know, Ken Curtis was a character actor who had started in a lot of John Ford westerns. He was in The Searchers, for example, part of John Ford's stock troupe of character actors, of actors, that is. And in talking to you and looking at your filmographies, you've worked with a lot of people from Hollywood's golden age, and it seems like it's a really important thing for you to remember that connection to these people that made these films, to sort of draw attention to them and remember their names. Is that an important thing? Is that something you think about?
Oh my gosh, it was an honor to work with these character people that had been around a long time, and particularly when you're sort of a young, arrogant whippersnapper, it was a privilege.
I think it, for both of us on some, well, Katharine and I have talked about this a long time ago, about how thankful we are to have grown up when we did, number one, when we did, in a big picture. But within Hollywood, I think that working with those people really grounded us in kind of what the business, where it was born in the beginning. It grounded us to the game. And that we respected going in. And I mean, I wanted to do this since I was a little kid, and the opportunity to work with those guys in the beginning, when it was on its way out, was unbelievable. It was kind of a passing of the torch in some ways. I remember Ben Johnson, one time I had this conversation with Ben. I've worked with Ben three times. We were talking about when he won his Academy Award for Last Picture Show. He talked about going to see Ford. There were a couple of stories that Ben told me that are worth telling. And one of them was when he went to see John Ford on his deathbed. And he said, Ford just held his hand, looked in the eye and said, "Be real, Ben, just be real." And that was what Ben was about. And I remember talking to him about when he won his Academy Award. And he said, "I may not be the best actor in town, but nobody can play Ben Johnson like I can." I put that away there, because I know I'm not the best actor in town either, but nobody can play Sam Elliott like I can.
Well, I do have one more question for the both of you, and it's pertaining to somebody that you both work with. I mean, Katharine, you worked with some pretty big names in the 60s. Your feature film debut was a film called Shenandoah, starring Jimmy Stewart. And Sam, you worked with James Stewart on his television show, Hawkins, in '73. Tell us about Jimmy Stewart.
Oh my gosh, I mean, the ultimate professional, and yet a total human being.
That's about it.
I told you a story this morning. You want me to tell that story?
Please.
I worked with Jimmy Stewart on a show called Hawkins for the defense. It was right at the end of his career. And I was playing a defense attorney. This is one episode. I'd seen him around town a couple of times, but never had met with him. We were working at MGM at the old studios down on Motor Avenue, which means nothing to El Paso. But it was a great big beast of a sound stage, and it was in the middle of summer. It was very hot. And Jimmy Stewart had this dresser, a guy that he traveled with forever, that looked out after him and took care of his wardrobe for him most of the time, but was just a close companion. And I noticed, this was back in the old days before they were shooting digital and they were still shooting film, and the coverage in those days was they'd do a big wide shot and then they'd move in for coverage, and it was much different than it is today in the digital world. So when they move in from the wider shot into the close shot, one of the actors is off camera all the time doing his stuff, and the camera is focused on the guy who's in front of the camera, obviously. And I noticed something that stuck with me forever, that the first thing we do between setups, when we do the master, we'd get all these, we were wearing coats, we were wearing suits because we were lawyers, and we were wearing top coats because, I don't know, it was cold outside, supposedly, within the story. But every time between setups, this dresser would come in and take Mr. Stewart's top coat and his suit coat away from him, and, so he could, cool off a little bit. It was hot. We were sweating. It was that hot. We were sweating. And I remember when I got back to do my coverage, where I was in front of the camera, and Mr. Stewart was off camera, here came this dresser with these coats. And although Mr. Stewart wasn't on camera, he put his coats back on. He put his jacket back on, and he put this top coat back on. I just thought, this guy is, like Katharine just said, he was a consummate professional. That he wanted to be that same guy when he was off camera, that he wanted to be in front of the camera. And that's the most giving kind of a situation an actor can offer you. And I've carried that with me for the rest of my career since I worked with him. I've never worked off camera since then without everything on and trying to be that same guy. It really is. It's like it's a collaborative game. That's what we love about it in its best form. I know Katharine would say the same thing. When you work with people that want to collaborate, when you have a director that is able to collaborate, it just ups the whole process.
But it's everybody. It's the entire crew. I mean, it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle, and you take one piece away, and there's a hole. But when you have a group, and it's not just the actors, it's everybody that is working on the movie, you're all working together, and there's nothing like it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to start the show, but just to remind you that tomorrow at 3:30 right here in the Plaza Theater, Sam and Katharine will be back with a 1978 film that they both starred in called The Legacy. But in the meantime, let's give a round of applause to the star of the film, Mark